Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
I'm delighted to welcome Professor Nidhal Guessoum today to the Faraday Institute. This is not the first time that Professor Guessoum has spoken in this room. He's spoken at one of our summer courses. He's an old friend, and therefore it's a particular privilege to welcome him here today. Professor Guessoum is Professor of Astronomy and Physics in the American University of Sharjah, which is in the United Arab Emirates. Just arrived yesterday. It's a little warmer down there than it is here, but adjusting to beautiful Cambridge. He was previously at NASA's Goddard Space Center before taking up this particular position in Sharjah. And not only has Professor Guessoum published widely, of course, in his own field of astronomy and physics, but also in the whole field of education, religion, Islam, science, and so forth, and increasingly in these last 5 or 10 years. And his latest book is the one I was just mentioning. Is called Islam's Quantum Question, Reconciling Muslim Tradition and Modern Science. We have actually been selling that off our bookstore for quite a while, and to my horror I noticed right in the middle of the holiday season last week that we only had one copy left, so that there is one copy. So please buy it afterwards, but also other people, if you're interested, have a look. And if you'd like to get a copy, you can give...
We have 10 copies.
Oh, we have 10 copies. I'm sorry, take that all back. That was very rapid ordering from last week then, sorry. Good, we've got plenty of copies, so do buy them all then in that case. Thank you, Bonnie, very much. Sorry. Okay. So we're delighted that Professor Guessoum is going to speak today on science religion in Islam today, a critical survey. So thanks very much, Nidhal.
Thank you so much, Dennis. It's a delight and a privilege for me to be here again. This is my second visit to Cambridge, and this is the second time I have come to the Faraday Institute. So all the credit goes to you. I am very, very happy to be talking to you about Islam and science. As you can see in the title, there are two key words in addition to Islam and science, and those are critical and survey. This is going to be a very broad presentation about the state of the interrelation or interface between Islam and science in today's Muslim world. But before I do that, I will have to go back for a short moment to the past before going back to the present and trying to move forward and identify what are the flaws and what proposed remedies one can suggest. So it is a survey. I will not be going into very much detail about or depth about various topics, because I will want to show you several ideas and several issues that pertain to the topic today. And it's also a critical survey because I want to really identify the problems that one can find when looking at this whole interface between the two topics. So, moving forward, here's what I would like to present to you today. As I said before, presenting to you the state of science in the Muslim world today, I'll have to go back a little bit to the past, just to show you the rich tradition that existed for science in the Islamic civilization for centuries and centuries, and also to contrast that with the present situation, which we will find to be rather depressing. I will be focusing a little bit on one of the major conflicts, perhaps the biggest major conflict that we find today in the Muslim world, and that is the issue of evolution and creationism. Much more than we can find it in the rest of the world. Of course, it's not an exclusively Islamic problem, but in the Muslim world, as I will show, it is a significant problem. I will not want to be too gloomy and focus only on the negatives or the shortcomings. So I will want to show you also some of the positive signs that we can identify in this whole field or in this whole topic in the past recent years. Then I will be talking a little bit about the more serious discourse, the philosophical, theological, conceptual discussions that have taken place in the Islamic community or the Islamic elite, among the Islamic elite, about modern science and the Islamic principles. So I will be showing you a few slides presenting various positions. There's a whole spectrum, very diverse views on that. and then my own modest harmonizing proposal, what I call the spirit of Averroes, and we'll get to that a little bit. And in the end, of course, I will be offering some summaries and conclusions about what is the situation then and what should be done about today's place. Science/knowledge in the Islamic culture. People always say, when you read the Islamic or the Muslim literature nowadays, or for all the time that you can find it, people always start from the Quran. I always say that the Islamic culture is grounded in the Quranic book. This is extremely important to understand anything about the Muslim world today, especially anything that has educational, social, cultural implications. And when people talk about science or knowledge, the reason why I put knowledge, science/knowledge, is because, as I will be saying in a moment, the Arabic Islamic world pertaining to it is the same. The word ilm, which I'll go back to in a short while, is invariably translated as either science or knowledge, and of course the two words are not synonymous. But that sort of ambiguity between science and knowledge exists in the whole tradition and in the whole literature. In any case, you will find many verses, many Quranic verses that have something to do with knowledge, with science, with nature, with investigation, with contemplation, with exploration, etc. As Abdus Salam, whom I'll be mentioning a little bit later, the first Muslim to receive the Nobel Prize in the sciences, 1979, was always fond of saying, he said, out of the 6,000 or so verses in the Quran, there are about 750 that have to do with the natural world, with go and observe and look in the heavens and the planets and the stars and the waters and the mountains and this and that, compared to only about 250 verses out of 6,000 that have to do with thou shalt do and thou shalt not do. So there's a lot more emphasis on the natural world. And so you can see some of these verses, and among his signs, the creation of the heavens and the earth, etc. Of course, you find similar things, if not equally eloquent in the Bible and other scriptures, but in the Quran you find many such verses. Say, contemplate what is in the heavens and the earth, say, travel in the land and see how he originated creation, etc., etc. As you may know, the second important source of knowledge and information, and the second biggest reference in the Islamic culture, is what we call the hadith. The hadith is the whole collection of statements and acts of the Prophet Muhammad, and that is recorded and always considered to be the second reference next to the Quran. And when you look at the hadith or the prophetic statements, and some of the statements made by other illustrious Muslims throughout the history of Islam, not all of these statements are attributed to the Prophet himself, but some of them are, and some of them are attributed to other great scholars or religious leaders or thinkers. And you can see the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. God put out there a cure for every disease he created. Those first two statements are from the Prophet himself. And then some others, an hour's contemplation or study of nature is better than a year's adoration of God. And then seek knowledge even in China. Things like this. Even in China, meaning as far away as China. And people, you have, as I know from Dennis and from your website, Mehdi Golshani, the Iranian current thinker, is always fond of saying, of repeating that statement and saying, clearly when that statement was meant, the implication, that the thing that he wants to emphasize, is that it was not religious knowledge that was being pursued or encouraged, since religious or Islamic knowledge would not be found in China then. So clearly there was other knowledge and other science to be gained as far away as China. There's another issue that is important and sort of specific to the Islamic culture, and that is that Islam itself, in many of its acts, in many of the practices of the Muslims, requires to a large extent some knowledge and some mastery of science. This is not new. This has always existed from the beginning. In particular, people have to know a little bit of science, astronomy, some mathematics, etc., in order to determine prayer times, for example, the direction of Mecca. I have to know from here which way I have to turn when the time for prayer comes. This is the crescent, which determines for us the beginning of months, including the month of Ramadan, which will be coming in about 2 months, and then the end of the month of Ramadan, and then the month during which the pilgrimage is performed, etc. Not to mention all the other months which determine the Islamic calendar. The Islamic calendar is based not just on the moon, but on the crescent. And that requires knowledge, understanding of the motion, not only of the motion of the moon around the earth, but also the conditions in which or at which the crescent will appear in the beginning of the lunar month. And that is something that takes quite a bit of understanding and knowledge. Unfortunately, I will not have time to detail all of this, but people who will be here for the symposium in the next few days will hear me give a detailed lecture on all of these issues, the prayer times, the crescent-based months and calendars. Zakat is the obligatory charity, 2.5% of one's savings, if it is pure money saved in an account, 5% or 10% if it is agricultural products, etc. There are a whole series of rules that are clearly related to either astronomy or mathematics. Inheritance rules are extremely detailed and very complex in Islam. Medicine, what is allowed, what is not allowed, the products that one can take, at which times, etc. Architecture, all of this is related to some form of science or some branch of science or another. So this is another reason why science has always been a hugely needed and required activity among the Muslims from the beginning. Now, I mentioned earlier the concept of ilm. Ilm here is the word that relates to science and knowledge, found hundreds of times in the Quran and thousands of times in the Islamic classical literature. This is an extremely important word because it is a little bit general and a little bit, to some extent, undefined or difficult to pin down. Some people usually translate it as just knowledge, very general. Some others, in fact, even today when we say science, if I just want to say science to my students in Arabic, or I teach in English, but if I want to speak to anybody in Arabic and just want to mention science in Arabic, I have to say ilm. There is no specific word for science in Arabic other than the word ilm, which traditionally and originally was always meant as knowledge. And so there is always this ambiguity. Now, here are two thinkers, contemporary thinkers. Actually, Sardar lives in London, has lived in London for the past, 45 years or so. And Munawar Anis lives now in the US, is from Malaysia. Both of them contemporary, they're 55 to 60 years old. And here's what they say about the word ilm, or the concept of ilm in Islam. Sardar says it integrates the pursuit of knowledge with values. So it's not just a general concept, philosophical definition, or epistemological. It has ethical, moral, value dimensions to it, combines factual insight with metaphysical concerns, and promotes an outlook of balance and genuine synthesis. All of this in this just word. Ani says it is an all-comprehensive and profound notion in the Quran. As I said, there's hundreds of references to ilm in the Quran. Second only to Tawheed. Tawheed is the oneness of God, which I'm sure all of you know is the most important concept in all of Islam. Tawheed, the oneness of God. So, if ilm is second in importance only to Tawheed, that tells you what kind of a central position it occupies in the Islamic culture. Now, with all of this, let's jump now to the present and see what the situation is. Jim al-Khalili, we're still on yesterday, sorry, I still have a couple of slides on yesterday. Jim al-Khalili is a British physicist, a great speaker and writer and popularizer of science, has received awards, has books, series, TV series, etc. 2 years ago had the BBC TV series called Science and Islam. He is of Iraqi origin, but has lived, I think he was, not sure if he was born in Iraq or born here, but he has lived all of his life here in the UK. But he has some interest in the question of science and Islam. Here's what he said. He said, Isaac Newton is the undisputed father of modern optics, or so we are told at school. Yet, in the field of optics, Newton himself stood on the shoulders of a giant who lived 700 years earlier. Without doubt, another great physicist who is worthy of ranking up alongside Newton, this is Jim al-Khalili saying, is Al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham, who lived in Iraq and then in Egypt. This year, by the way, we are celebrating the 1000th anniversary of his most important book in which he revolutionized optics, Ibn al-Haytham. Ibn al-Haytham, this is still all al-Khalili saying, Ibn al-Haytham is regarded as the father of the modern scientific method. Most people in the West will never have even heard of him. Other great scientists, very quickly, and my intention here is just to show you the great tradition of science in Islam, and also in a moment to jump to the present and show what kind of a stark contrast we find. Al-Kindi, the first great philosopher of the Arabs as he is known, 9th century, great scientist, chemist, thinker, philosopher, etc., says our goal must be to garner the truth from wherever it may come, for nothing is of higher priority to the seeker of truth than truth. Their ideas, I'm only emphasizing here not their scientific achievements, but their philosophical views on knowledge and science. Avicenna said on the importance of requiring proof, he who gets used to believing without proof has slipped out of his natural humanness. This is Ibn Sina, or Avicenna as is known in the West. Al-Biruni, whom I consider as probably the greatest scientist of that whole 1,000-year history, adopted induction as the valid approach for research, debated it with Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina was a philosopher. Ibn Sina insisted on the deductive method, was always saying that you start from principles and then you deduce results. And Al-Biruni was, at least during that whole era, the first one to realize that in science, you have to do induction, you have to go from bottom up and not the other way. So there were some great developments. If you look now at science in the Muslim world today, out of about 2,000 universities in the Muslim world, few are in the top 500. And those 4 or 5 that are in the top 500 are only between 400 and 500. There are no university in the Muslim world that are in the top 400. This is an extraordinary situation. Whereas in the past, 1,000 years ago, people used to flock to Cordoba, to Baghdad, to Istanbul, etc. Nowadays, we don't have any university that is in the top 400. The number of scientific publications originating in the Muslim world is only 1.1% of world production, whereas Muslims make up about 25% of world population, and yet they produce only 1% or so of scientific knowledge. 1999, only 134 patents were registered in the whole Muslim region. In the whole Muslim region, this is more than 1 billion people, compared to more than 3,000 in Israel alone. Israel is only 6-7 million people. And we can go on like this with all kinds of statistics which are truly demoralizing. If you look now at scientific education, I just looked at research very briefly. Science education, there are international tests that people or countries, schools participate in from different places. This TIMSS has existed for about 15, 20 years now. The latest one was in 2007. The results were published about 2 years ago. And there were, I think, about 38 countries that participated, including about 15 from the Arab Muslim world. 8 of the bottom 9 countries of the 38 that participated were from the Muslim world. 8 of the 9 bottom ones are from the Muslim world, meaning that these kids at year 4 and year 8 in science and mathematics are performing at the lowest levels in the world, more or less. Recent international surveys of students at various levels showed large majorities rejecting evolution. This is another serious problem, not just at being able to solve scientific problems or mathematical exercises, but even at understanding or conceptualizing or realizing what is a fact, what is a theory, what is correct and what is not correct. We'll get to evolution in a second. 3, there is a major negative trend, I'll say right away, that is extremely widespread and extremely popular nowadays in the Arab Muslim world, and that is the claim that there is miraculous scientific content in the Quran. there are books, there are conferences, there are TV programs, right and left. It is dominant around me. The people will point to tens, perhaps hundreds of verses and say, look, this verse contains laser, contains rockets, contains sometimes facts, contains Big Bang, contains galaxies, contains this and that. And the claims are long, long, long and detailed. For example, in March 2008, there was the 9th conference, 9th international conference. By now there have been already 10, and I think the next one is supposed to be in Istanbul next year or something. 9th conference on scientific miraculous content in the Quran, held in Algeria. I am from Algeria, but this was not just by coincidence, it was in Algeria. The year before it was in Kuwait, and the year before that I think it was in Senegal, and so on. So it is truly international, under the patronage of the president himself. So these are not some obscure little conferences that somebody just funds or somebody organizes. These are big, national, international, funded and supported by sometimes governments, and under the World Authority on Miraculous Science in the Quran. The Prime Minister inaugurated the conference, and here's what he said then. This is just 3 years ago. Many researchers and scientists have ended up admitting that many of their discoveries and inventions in fact exist in the Quran. This is in the opening ceremony of that conference. And then papers, I'll save you the titles because they're really laughable and depressing. 2 years before that, the 8th conference in the series was held at Kuwait Sheraton. 86 papers were presented, and here's a list of some of the truly stunning ideas that are presented as papers. The miracle of the descent of iron from the sky, the scientific miracle in the Quran's description of the movement of the shadows, superiority of treatment of lower backs by prayers over the treatment by lasers, and it goes on and on like this. Remedying by vinegar and so forth. I want to move forward because, as I said, this is a survey and I want to touch on all kinds of different aspects of the Islam science field today. Evolution now. Let's talk a little bit about biological and human evolution. This appeared about 2 years ago. This is a survey of several countries or several people in different countries. This was published in Science magazine. As you know, Science Journal is one of the highest journals of scientific publishing in the world today, internationally. This was a question asking people in each situation in Kazakhstan, about 970 people, in Turkey 527 people, etc. What do you think of biological and human evolution? Do you think it is true? Do you think it's probably true? Do you think it cannot possibly be true? And the red part, the green part here, it represents the fraction of how many people said this is absolutely not true. Could not possibly be true. So you can see here, all of these is those who said could not possibly be true. Only Kazakhstan, of course, because of the Soviet or the previous Soviet influence in the educational system, etc., had some measure of acceptance of evolution, which is this part over here. All others, Turkey, Indonesia, Pakistan, Malaysia, Egypt, and in a moment I will be saying that in the past 2-3 years there have been more such surveys in other places like Lebanon and Indonesia and so forth. Most of them, as you can see, between could not possibly be true and probably false, the black part here, make up roughly about 60 to 70%. Now, why is that? Because there is a total fixation with human evolution. If you talk to people and you say, why do you have a problem with Darwin? Just to put it shortly. What is your problem with Darwin? They say, we cannot possibly accept that humans will have evolved from another species. Of course, they would not say it, sort of nicely like this. They would say, humans cannot come from monkeys. But when you talk to them and you say, but we didn't really, nobody says we came from monkeys and we had a common ancestor, etc. No, humans don't touch, okay? There was Adam, case closed. Then there is the Harun Yahya phenomenon, which has compounded the problem. Harun Yahya is is a Turkish activist. He presents himself as a thinker or scholar, but he's not a thinker or scholar, even though he has produced, I think now his number is more than 300 books with his name, but he has all kinds of people around him writing books, and they all come out in his name. He has no scientific or academic credentials, but he has a huge media machine in Turkey with huge amounts of money. There's a website that you can go to, harunyahya.com, and you will be able to download or receive by FedEx tons of books and videos and DVDs, and just ask. Just ask for anything and they will send you. In fact, even if you don't ask. Seriously. Like 2 years ago, they mailed to I don't know how many hundreds of schools and universities in Europe and in the US, to the point that in certain countries, the Minister of Education himself or herself, in Belgium, in Switzerland, and I think in France also, had to issue some directives to say, those books, don't even put them in the school libraries. Because there were some big books that were sent to all kinds of schools and libraries saying, just put them in there so people can consult. And they were, of course, full of scientific nonsense. Now, there is, in addition to this, now they have branches, local branches in various places, where they try to indoctrinate people and influence the ministries of education. I know because in the United Arab Emirates, this has occurred, and there was some influence and there was some push to remove anything related to evolution from the educational curriculum. So this is one of the serious problems that we are encountering nowadays. I mentioned earlier that there are some other surveys appearing nowadays from Egypt, Lebanon, Turkey, Pakistan, and Indonesia. Here's a survey I conducted myself at my own university. The reason I'll tell you why I'm showing you this. Not because I did it or because it was at my university. Please be reminded that I am from the American University of Sharjah, of, I dare say, very high standards, one of the best levels of admissions in the region, and we have a huge diversity of students, more than 70 nationalities, and we have a large diversity of faculty nationalities, more than 50 different nationalities among the faculty. And that's the reason why I did my survey. It's because I have a laboratory in front of me of all kinds of people from all kinds of ethnic and religious backgrounds, and presumably high educational levels. Now, when you ask them, I'll show you just two questions with a couple of choices, or a few choices. Evolution is just an unproven theory, I don't believe in it. Or evolution is correct except for humans. Or evolution is strongly confirmed by evidence. Now, Muslim students, 62% choose the first one, 28% choose the second one, and only 11% say, yes, it is strongly confirmed by evidence. Muslim professors, guess what? Almost exactly the same. And that's the thing that really sort of depresses. It's even if you have a PhD, still it almost makes no difference. So if you had 10 years of higher education or 1 year of higher education, it makes almost no difference. Non-Muslim professors, completely the other way. Completely the other way. Now, here's another question about whether evolution should be taught. This is at a university, asking people, do you think we should teach evolution? And the possible answers that I give them is, evolution is against religion, it should not be taught. Or, evolution should be taught, but just as a theory. Of course, people don't even understand the concept of theory. But okay, let's play along. Evolution should be taught as a strong theory. To be sort of consistent with this, if it is a strong theory and it has been confirmed and there is evidence for it, etc., then it should be with the same. Now, look what. Likewise, for Muslim students and professors, and you only get about 20% saying yes, do teach it. Whereas for non-Muslim professors, 0% say it should not be taught because of religious ideas or religious objections. And 64% say yes, of course it should be taught. Now, I said I don't want to get to be completely gloomy. I do want to show you some positive things about the region and Islam and science. First and foremost, women have made huge strides in Arab higher education, science, and research. I'll show you more evidence of this in a moment. there is an emergence of a new, well-endowed research funding agencies in the Gulf region, in Qatar in particular, in the United Arab Emirates to some extent, and some other countries that have realized that, hey, we really not need to pump some money into scientific research if we don't want to get, those depressing statistics that I showed you at the beginning in terms of contribution to science and performance and so forth. Large increase in university enrollments in the past 10 to 20 years. Large increases in research spending, 2%. By the way, 2%, the average in the whole world is about 1%. 1% of GDP is spent on research worldwide, roughly. Countries that put some emphasis and try to do something seriously about scientific research spend about 2%. In some countries, it can get to 4% and sometimes 5 and 6%. The average in the Arab world is 0.2%. 0.2%. And so now some countries, even the richest of the richest countries like Qatar and the UAE and Saudi Arabia are saying, okay, let's do something really big now and try to reach the 2%. So just reaching the 2% is sort of a huge milestone and achievement. Creation of science and technology parks like the one in Qatar here. Let me show you the part that really warms me up. Every time I get completely depressed, I go and consult these numbers. Female enrollment at Arab universities, average female enrollment, this is just female enrollment at universities in general, not even talking about science as yet, is 46%. 46% is not bad. It's really not bad, average. Considering that in this average, you're counting places like Yemen, Iraq, and some of the poor, difficult countries where it would be very hard to send the women to universities to begin with, because there are few universities and because it's mostly rural countries and so on and so forth. But do notice, please, that even in the conservative Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Emirates, Qatar, the average of how many of the students are female at universities, at public universities, is about 70 to 75%. In other words, the ratio of women to men at universities in the Gulf is 3 to 1, in general. Now, secondly, if you compare it now to the rest of the world, compare it to the rest of the world, here's the rest of the world over here, on the right, and on the left is the Arab world. It's true that there are certain countries that are still behind, but then again, these are poor, as I said, and they have their own difficulties. But in some cases, again, in the Gulf, they're higher than the highest of the world in terms of female enrollment. Even more than that, if you look now into the sciences, so now I'm interested only in the science. Science fields, here's the world, over here, here's the Arab world. Meaning, if you look in classes of biology, physics, chemistry, geology, etc. in the Arab world, if I teach a class of astronomy or physics, how many girls do I get and how many boys in the class? And as you can see, because I didn't put the Emirates, but it's pretty much the same as Qatar and Bahrain, I get about 75% girls. So the girls specializing in the sciences are largely dominant compared to the boys in most of the Arab world. Most of the Arab worlds over here, you can see they're almost all above 40%, and some of them are above the 60 and 70% level. So this is very encouraging. In fact, even if you look at countries like Saudi Arabia, which we tend to dismiss as completely backwards and anachronistic, etc., even in Saudi Arabia, in 1999-2000, 39% of people or students who were awarded master's degrees in the sciences, 40% of them were women. Master's degree, this is at the graduate level. PhD degrees were granted to 52 graduates in Saudi Arabia in sciences, 79% were women, PhDs. So they are getting degrees and they are performing. Now it's still a very new trend, and it is difficult to tell whether this will have a social, cultural, transformative effect or not. But at least things are changing. slow start of science activity in the media, the 2011 World Conference of Science Journalists is going to be held in Qatar next month. So, International World Conference of Science Journalism will be in Qatar. There has been a new Arab Science Journalists Association established in 2006, so this is only 5 years old. There are conferences of science journalism, there are competitions, awards. There's an Arab science blog called The House of Wisdom by Muhammad Yahya, an Egyptian very, very bright fellow. I encourage you, those of you who like to follow blogs, to check out this blog, House of Wisdom. He writes about a couple of times a week as something about, by the way, I checked it, I think, yesterday or so, and he had a post about the biggest whale skeleton ever has just been found in Egypt. So it tells you the kind of topics and interests. Now, serious science Islam discourse, I said I will also try to touch on the philosophical, conceptual debates and discussions that go on nowadays, or have been going on. In the 70s and 80s, there were three main schools that attempted to, quote, properly define the relation between Islam and modern science. Now this would require sort of a whole talk. Just what is the problem, or what is potentially the complication or difficulty between Islam and modern science? Because people tend to say, whenever we say Islam and science, as in the title of my talk, they will say, what's the problem? There's no problem. Islam and science. Look at how many verses in the Quran, look how many great scientists in the whole history of Islam. There has never been, the motto is, there has never been a problem between Islam and science. And I say, yeah, but I'm not talking about science, I'm talking about modern science. Modern science is a different animal, has different concepts, has different philosophy of science, has different implications, and you have to really sort of contend with it. It's not the same. So people who understood this in the 70s and the 80s tried to redefine the relation between Islam and modern science. And broadly, I will go back to these in one slide each in a moment, there is the sacred science proposal of Sayyid Hussein Nasr. I'll get back to this in a moment. A radical proposal, essentially saying modern science is a big problem, is wrong, to put it bluntly, and we need to redo modern science on sacred grounds. Sardar, whom I mentioned earlier, and his group, now defunct this group, the Ijmalis, tried to define a new Islamic science, or Islamic flavor of modern science, which is mostly ethical, and I will get back to this in a moment. And then Abdus Salam, whom I also mentioned earlier, the Nobel Prize winner, who basically was sort of the counterweight, saying, hey guys, just take it easy, modern science is universal, there is no problem, okay, just go on. And then there is the, quote, new generation of voices that has appeared in the past 10 years or so, including Bolshaya I mentioned, and if I can be immodest enough to put myself in that group, and others, Guiderdoni, Altai, Bakir in Indonesia, and others. Altai is in Jordan, Guiderdoni, French Muslim, and others who have also been sort of discussing these issues. But here are the three big ideas that have appeared until now, which I discuss at some length in my book, and I find most of them to some extent lacking or not completely satisfactory. The first one that I find completely unsatisfactory is this sacred Islamic science. Sayyid Hussein Nasr, whom you see on the picture, widely regarded as one of the most important Muslim philosophers of today, or for the past 20 years, has lived in the United States since Iranian of origin, and has lived in the States since the Iranian Revolution, meaning since 1979. Is now, I think, about 80 years old or so, still active and writing, has radical proposals. Essentially, he says, modern science is a human anomaly. Don't get too impressed with modern science is wrong, and sooner or later we will get out of it, and we will go back to the old way of understanding science and nature and the world and God. Why is modern science a human anomaly? Because it has disconnected from God and produced major ills. Two big issues. So because it has taken God out of the picture, it does not reject God, as you all know. Modern science does not say there is no God. It says God is a metaphysical principle, and we need to do naturalistic science. And he says, the moment you say that, that is a big crime. And secondly, because it has produced all kinds of ills, from environmental catastrophes to the debasement of man, fragmentation of our minds, disorder in our lives, and so forth. He insists that science in the Islamic civilization considered nature as sacred, which I think is an incorrect claim. I don't think nature has I shouldn't say traditionally, not in the mainstream at least, been considered in the Islamic tradition as sacred. There are, of course, many fields or tendencies or movements, the Sufis in particular, who consider sacredness as more widespread, but the mainstream Islamic thought does not say that nature is sacred. But that's what he claims. And he says the cosmos should be seen as a unified realm of material and spiritual beings. In other words, that duality, the disconnect, Descartes, and afterwards, that you put the spirit on one side and the materialistic dimensions of humans and others on other side, and science only deals with this. He says that is wrong. If we do science, we should consider the whole thing altogether. That's nuts. Anyway, so he goes on like this. You can see access to information can be by reason or by individual intuition. In other words, you could, by mystical exercises, reach certain truths about the world, or make some discoveries, or find some laws. Not by reason and scientific method, but by other means as well. At least that's what he believes. And finally, he rejects many of the objectives of modern science, confirmation by repeatability, accuracy, falsifiability, and everything that we know about the philosophy of modern science. He says, that is all wrong. The most important thing about science, in his new definition, are really the ideas of purpose, meaning, beauty, harmony. Forget what today's philosophy of science is teaching you. So that's Sardar. That's Nasser. Sardar now says the problem with modern science is that it has disconnected from ethics. It does things that are very, very wrong and criminal. And that's the problem. If you allow modern science to continue the way it has been functioning, then it will ruin humanity and Earth. And that's what we need to, that's the check we need to place on modern science. It's not a question of sacredness and spirits. It's a question of this free reign that we have given to modern science, this total dominance of reason, just go and find any result, that is very wrong. We need to, essentially, he says, we need to go back to the Islamic principles that will allow us to put checks on the progress and function and operation of science. And he cites a number of principles of Islam, Tawheed that I have mentioned before, this divine unity, Khilafah, human trusteeship of earth, knowledge and worship, those two things that go together, justice, public interest. Sardar is very utilitarian in his understanding of science. And so he says, we need to sort of redraw the lines and boundaries and action and course for modern science in order for it to be really beneficial for humans. Then there's Abdul Salam, who says, guys, this is all nonsense. That's Abdul Salam, died in 1995, I think, or 96. First Muslim Nobel Prize winner, devout but rationalist. I mean, I shouldn't say but. I mean, devout and rationalist. Really. Because yeah, that tells you, I mean, there is something in the back of our minds, huh? I mean, I consider myself, and people always consider me as rationalist, and I think I'm reasonably devout, or at least, believer. I don't want to be but, it's not like anyway. But I've met Abdul Salam before his death. I've sat down with him. He gave lectures at the university that I was at the time. And an absolutely brilliant mind and an absolutely beautiful soul, beautiful person. And he says, science is universal. He says only the applications of science are affected by culture and by society. But science hey, you do some experiment, you come up with a formula or a law, whether you're Japanese or South African, it really doesn't make any difference. And of course, some people laugh at him and say, hey, you're naive. If you really think that, then you're really simple-minded. He does not believe there are any serious metaphysical, meaning conceptual problems in modern science that warrant a reconstruction. He says, this is a quote from him, he says, there is no Islamic science, just like there is no Chinese, Indian, Hindu, or Jewish science. Science is science. But he has been labeled as conventionalist, modernist, universalist, business as usual by his critics. They say, you know, this guy just wants to continue with the flow like everybody else, and he just doesn't want to, he hasn't really paid attention, and he doesn't understand the problems. Now, my views in a nutshell: adopt modern science in all its rigorous methodology and result. I think we have no choice. We cannot pick and choose, and this is one of the big problems that we encounter in the Arab Muslim world. People think that science is, oh, this, yeah, I accept that, I'll take it. And then something else, no, I don't accept that. So if you tell them, no, I don't accept. On what grounds? No, I don't believe that. So, excuse me, science is not belief. It's not like, no, this I like and I believe, and this I cannot quite believe, so I'll just ignore it. You cannot do that. So there's a whole discussion, there's a long chapter on science and its critics, it's called in the book. Before I get to the later stages of explanations, then how do we harmonize? How do we find consistency with the religious, spiritual traditions, whether Muslim or Christian or others? I say we can add an optional, underline the word optional, theistic, interpretative mental, or code, or shal or something. I think the shal is an even better analogy. Like you add on top of it, and it has a comforting feel to it. It has an aesthetic feel to it. It has a cultural feel to it. You put it on because that's your culture, or you don't put it on because it really doesn't add anything. I mean, that's not the one that will protect you from the cold, or that's not the one that will do so. It will not modify the science, but it will add some meaning or some cultural. It will play a cultural function. So the theistic interpretation can be added optionally. Then, universally impose stringent ethical standards like those of Islam. Notice that I have put like those of Islam in a different color, meaning it doesn't have to be those of Islam, but Islam certainly provides you with a set of ethical principles that we can and should add. I mean, I agree with Sardar that we need to put certain checks on modern science and not let it run wild. And so Islam does provide you with that, and I'm sure other traditions can as well. Then there is the question of what to do with the Quran, since people will come to me and say, oh, yeah, okay, but what about this verse? How do you explain this? And how do you harmonize this one? And I say, accept the Quran's guidance and philosophy of knowledge. In other words, the Quran does not give you scientific information. The Quran gives you general principles, general guidance, and of course, because it deals with nature and the world and existence in, as I said, 750 verses, clearly it's going to deal with the world, with what happens above us and what happens underneath us and so forth, but not in a scientific manner. Make hermeneutics, meaning the interpretation, the scriptural interpretation, obligatory each time there is any apparent contradiction with modern science. This is why this is known as the spirit of Averroes, because these ideas were almost exactly the same that Averroes had developed 800 years ago, but he had done it for religion and philosophy. And I am saying it's exactly the same reasoning and it's exactly the same mental mindset if you take, instead of religion and philosophy, take religion and science today. It's the same ideas. So, summary and conclusions. I hope I'm about on time. Maybe, yeah? Okay, so let's, first of all, the negative stuff. There's a worrisome status of science in today's Muslim world. I showed you some serious problems in research, in education, in terms of concepts, like evolution and so forth, and attitudes. As I mentioned in passing, there is this widespread attitude that science, is sort of a nice menu. And I take this, and I don't like that. And that cannot go on. That is a no-no. although there are some positive signs also, as I showed, what do we need to do? What we need to do is, first of all, teach the philosophy of science widely and seriously. That has been lacking very, very widely in the Arab Muslim world. And that's the reason why there is a big fuzziness, fuzzy understanding of what modern science is about. If you ask people what is methodological naturalism, I would bet you that 95% of university professors would not be able to tell you. If you ask them what is Popper's falsifiability, I would bet you that more than 80% will not be able to tell you. I'm talking about university professors. And that's the problem. You cannot discuss science and even relate it to anything cultural or religious if you don't even understand the principles of modern science. Set up forums, academies, conferences, etc. to discuss and publicize science, its paradigms, its social implications, and so on. Encourage more enrollment in and engagement with science by the students and by the professors, as well as endowments and patronage. We need every source of funding, every source of encouragement to participate in the development of science. Establish, or at least increase, freedom of inquiry. And that's one of the problems. If any time somebody steps up and starts to produce or present certain ideas that are not in the mainstream, there is nowadays too much tendency to just, sort of clobber him down. And that cannot exist in a society that wants to promote science or intellectual achievements. So now this is sort of the famous or usual shameless plug. My book. So I'll just put this here just to give you an idea of what the book is about, and I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nidhal. Over to you for questions, please. Yes, please.
During the earlier years, in Spain, as you said, in Cordova, Islamic science was dominant. What caused it to be, in effect, sort of shut off? One question. The other, ever so quick. Right at the beginning.
Oh, that one was quick? Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, this one's quick.
Okay. Do you want to just do the first question first, I think? Or is it a related question?
Well, no, it's related in a way because you put up a quote from the Quran that said, he ordered the universe, blah, blah, blah. I just wondered if the Islamic word for he actually could be she, it, or whatever. Is it actually a masculine word?
Well, the word used in the Quran is a masculine one, but clearly, I mean, when you talk to theologians or you read any of the books, since we're talking about God, even the word he or she or it would be inapplicable anyway, because we're talking about something that is completely transcendent and completely above. So it is just a way of describing an entity, let's call it an entity. But the pronoun itself, everybody agrees that has no specific meaning in terms of gender or in terms of. Now, the first question, the reason why I said was that a quick question is because this is a question that has been debated now by scholars for decades, and there is no agreement as to what were the causes for decline. Let me just, in 1 minute, run sort of some of the ideas that have come down. There is even a big disagreement as to when did the decline occur. I mean, there is a decline. Nobody will say there was no decline, come on, just stop it. That question is moot. No, there was a decline. I mean, if you compare, as I did, what happened 1,000 years ago to what is happening today, I mean, this is just like night and day. So clearly, at some point, we declined. But when did the decline occur? And that is a crucial question because depending on whether you situate the decline in, as most people do, 13th century or 16th century or even 18th century, then the causes are going to be very different. Now, people tend to blame very often several factors. One is external invasions. The sack of Baghdad in 1258 is very widely considered as a turning point because Baghdad, which was like Cordoba, which was like Istanbul, one of the biggest places, the House of Wisdom was created there, the first observatory of Islam was created in Baghdad, and so on, was sacked. People say that the rivers of Baghdad, the Euphrates and the Tigris, turned black for days from the books that were thrown in there. So that was clearly a turning point. And then there were other invasions. The Crusades were a big a big blow to the Muslim dominance and even to its activity. Some of the in Spain, you mentioned Spain, Toledo, which was one of the biggest centers, fell in 1085. So even in the 11th century, the push from the north started in Spain, and the cities of Muslim Spain started to fall one after the other. And by the 12th century or 13th century, 3/4 of Muslim Spain had already fallen. So there were external invasions. Number two, some people blame the conservative theological movement that developed by the 11th century and onward, which condemned philosophy, put strong restraints on certain fields and certain ideas. Al-Ghazali, the famous Al-Ghazali, condemned some of the biggest philosophers, including Avicenna, Al-Farabi, and others, condemned them as heretics on the basis of some of their philosophical views. So people started to, oh, wait a minute, now I better be careful what I say because I don't want to be labeled a heretic. By Al-Ghazali is widely considered nowadays as the biggest theologian of the history of Islam. What else? Some other issues very important are the economic dominance of the Muslim world, of the Muslim empire, started to decline with the emergence of Europe, with Renaissance, pre-Renaissance, and after post-Renaissance Europe, with the voyages of discovery, with the lots of money that started to come from the Americas and from the ships that traveled and brought spices and gold and so on and so forth. So there were all kinds of effects. So long answer, because as I said, it's a long debate, this decline issue.
It was a quick question, though.
Well, long answer, okay.
Please. Yes.
Yeah, this visit of yours, this right now, is taking place during a time when we're seeing a lot of change in the Islamic world. That may or may not be relevant to your presentation, but while you identified some features of change taking place in the Islamic world at the moment, like the high enrollment of girls, ladies in science, you didn't identify an engine for change, a drive for change. I'm wondering if you see a will to change and a will to move up higher up the league table for the Islamic world in the world of science.
I did allude to that at the very end when I talked about freedom of inquiry and freedom of expression. And I said, you cannot have a society that will want or be able to progress in science if it denies freedom of expression and freedom of inquiry. If every time somebody, myself or others, defend evolution or defend one point of view or one idea or another, we start getting attacked right and left. And I have written, in fact, about the present revolutions taking place in the Arab world. I have written from the scientific point of view, or from the science activity point of view, and I have said this is potentially and very optimistically a very welcome development, because hopefully this will just open up the gates, will open up the debates, will give more democracy in the sense that everybody has a say, everybody has an expression, and let me present my views and try to convince you, and somebody else will present views and try to convince you, and the best ideas always triumph in the end. It will also change some of the old cronyism and corrupt systems that have been in place, which have really sort of put people who do not deserve to be in certain places in those places, and condemned those who really have serious ideas but shut them down for some specific unwarranted reasons. So I am to a large extent hopeful, because I think that every time freedom triumphs, everybody wins.
Please.
Two comments relating to Pakistan. I've been working there. Women in science in Pakistan is very encouraging. Pakistan wasn't listed among your ones there,
Right.
but the involvement of women in learning science and their high quality of their work and their results is very encouraging. The other thing is I'm tempted to try and take Abdus Salam away from you because he was declared a non-Muslim in Pakistan for the reasons I know.
No, thank you very much for your comments. The only reason why Pakistan was not listed there was because that graph was taken from another presentation where I had talked about science in the Arab world. And so if you notice in that graph, all the countries that were listed on the left were all Arab countries.
I think Indonesia was on one of them.
No, that was only on the evolution part, on the evolution, but on the women, on the female, we can go back and it was only on the Arabs. But that's the only reason. Otherwise, I would be delighted to show that other Muslim countries are doing very well. And indeed, as you say, in the Asian part of the world, in the non-Arab part of the world, women tend to do even better. Now, Abdus Salam, that condemnation is an extremely sad episode. Extremely sad episode. I have a picture on my laptop of the tombstone on his grave, where it was written in Urdu, one of the greatest Muslim scientists to ever live, and somebody went there and just defaced the word Muslim, because he was Qadiani. Now, he defined himself as Muslim, so who am I and who is anybody? He claimed, he kept saying, I am Muslim, I defend Islam. I sat with him, and he was reciting verses from the Quran. As he was giving his lecture, I remember I was very impressed. The call for prayer was pronounced elsewhere, and he just sat quiet for like 3 minutes until the call for prayer was finished. Then he resumed his speech. Somebody defines himself as a Muslim. Who is anybody to just say, hey, you're not a Muslim by my standard, I'm just going to delete that word from your memory. So, but that tells you the kind of intolerance that has existed in that part of the world.
Peter.
We are all aware that within the Christian community there's a great range of how you interpret the Bible, from the very literal to the very liberal.
Yeah.
Is there the same kind of range within the Islamic world?
Very good. Yes, historically yes, intellectually yes, but in the past, as happens when there is a decline, as happens when there is a collapse of intellectual power and freedom and openness and debate, etc., the very conservatives always tend to rule the day, and so we have seen a large dominance of the literalistic mindset in recent decades, for decades if not for centuries. Now we're beginning to see a little bit more of the more liberal or more, I don't want to say more intelligent because it would sort of show my bias, but the other types of interpretations and hermeneutics and scholarship. And one of the positive signs, one of the positive factors that we have all benefited from is the digital revolution. The digital revolution has just given a platform to people who used to be unheard because they would never be shown on TV, because they would never be published in the newspapers, and because they would never be allowed to speak in the mosques or in the universities. And now all of a sudden, hey, I have access to the web, I can have my blog, and I can put my ideas out there, and people will read them and say, hey, this is good. So we have seen some resurgence of the non-literalistic approaches. And again, on this point, I am very hopeful.
Well, our time is up, and it's a pity, I know, because we could go on for a lot longer, but I know we really should finish at 2. So let's thank Nidhal for really a great talk. So thank you.